At 14 years old, she arrived in Russia as a foreign girl with no real power, no allies, and barely any understanding of the language. 3 decades later, she would rule the largest empire in Europe. Her husband would be dead. Her critics would fear her, and millions of people would know her by a different name entirely. Catherine the Great. But the path from isolated outsider to absolute ruler was not built on confidence alone. It was built on observation, patience, emotional control, and a gradual transformation shaped by power itself. Catherine was born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729 into a minor German noble family. Her upbringing was modest by royal standards. There was status, but little real influence. Her mother was ambitious and socially aggressive. Her father was distant and restrained. Sophie grew up in an environment where approval felt conditional and position felt fragile. That instability mattered. From an early age, she learned how quickly affection could disappear inside aristocratic systems. Appearances were everything. Emotion had to be managed carefully. Unlike rulers born into unquestioned authority, Sophie developed as an observer first. She studied people constantly, their moods, their weaknesses, their ambitions. This would later become one of her greatest political advantages. In 1744, Empress Elizabeth of Russia invited the teenage Sophie to Russia. The goal was strategic. Sophie would marry Elizabeth's nephew and heir to the throne, the future Peter III. The transition was brutal. Russia was culturally unfamiliar, emotionally cold, and politically dangerous. Sophie was expected to abandon her identity completely. She converted to Russian Orthodoxy. She changed her name to Cathrien. She learned the Russian language obsessively, often studying late into the night. While ill, her future husband did not help. Peter was immature, emotionally unstable, and deeply unpopular at court. He admired Prussia more than Russia. He behaved unpredictably. Their marriage deteriorated almost immediately. Catherine later described feeling isolated and humiliated during these years. Whether her memoirs exaggerated certain details remains debated by historians. But the psychological pattern is clear. The young woman who entered Russia powerless slowly adapted by becoming emotionally disciplined. She learned patience, and patience became political intelligence. While Peter alienated nobles and military officers, Catherine cultivated them carefully. She read Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. She presented herself as educated, rational, and deeply invested in Russia's future. She understood something Peter never fully grasped. In royal courts, perception is survival. By the late 1750s, Catherine's environment had fundamentally changed. She was no longer simply a foreign bride trying to fit in. She had become a political figure in her own right. Then came the turning point. In 1762, Empress Elizabeth died. Peter III became emperor. His reign lasted only 6 months. Almost immediately, he destabilized his own position. He withdrew Russia from the 7 Years' War, despite recent military successes. He antagonized the Orthodox Church. He insulted military traditions. He appeared detached from Russian interests entirely. At the same time, Catherine's support network expanded quietly around her. Military officers, nobles, political insiders. Many believed Peter was incapable of ruling effectively. Others simply saw opportunity. In July 1762, Catherine acted. Supported by Key Guards regiments, she helped orchestrate a coup against her husband. Peter was forced to abdicate. Days later, he died under suspicious circumstances while in captivity. The exact details remain uncertain. What matters is that Catherine crossed a psychological line from survival to power. The cautious observer became ruler of an empire, and power changed her quickly. Early in her reign, Catherine projected the image of an enlightened monarch. She corresponded with intellectuals across Europe. She promoted education reforms. She attempted limited legal modernization through the Legislative Commission. She wanted to appear modern, rational, and progressive. But ruling Russia meant confronting realities that philosophy alone could not solve. The empire was vast, violent, unequal. Maintaining control required compromise with the nobility and military elite who had placed her on the throne. This tension shaped Catherine's transformation. Publicly, she embraced Enlightenment ideals. Privately, she became increasingly pragmatic, even ruthless when necessary. One of the clearest examples came during the Pugachev Rebellion in the 1770s. Yemelian Pugachev, a former soldier claiming to be the dead Peter III, led a massive uprising of peasants, Cossacks, and serfs against imperial authority. The rebellion spread rapidly across large parts of Russia. For Catherine, this was more than political unrest. It was personal psychological confirmation that her position remained fragile despite years on the throne. The memory of her own coup likely intensified that fear. She understood how quickly rulers could fall. Once legitimacy weakened, her response was severe. The rebellion was crushed violently, thousands died. Afterward, Catherine moved further away from reformist experimentation and closer towards centralized control. This marked an important shift. The ruler, who once imagined herself as a philosopher queen, increasingly governed like an imperial strategist, focused on stability above all else. That transformation was not unique to Catherine. History repeatedly shows similar patterns among leaders who rise through instability. Napoleon Bonaparte followed a comparable trajectory decades later. So did many 20th-century revolutionary figures. Idealism often survives only until disorder threatens survival. Then control becomes the priority. Catherine's Russia expanded dramatically under her rule. Crimea was annexed. Polish territories were partitioned. Russian influence spread deeper into Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region. These victories strengthened her prestige enormously. By the 1780s, Catherine stood at the center of one of the most powerful courts in Europe. Foreign diplomats admired her intelligence. Artists and philosophers praised her sophistication. Her image became carefully managed political theater, but success also altered the environment around her. Criticism became more dangerous to express openly. Court culture adapted itself around imperial expectations. Advisors increasingly told Catherine what she wanted to hear rather than what she needed to hear. This insulation affected her judgment in subtle ways. Like many long-ruling leaders, Catherine began identifying her personal perspective with the stability of the state itself. Opposition no longer appeared merely inconvenient. It appeared irrational, threatening, even immoral. The French Revolution deepened this shift dramatically. Initially, Catherine had admired aspects of French Enlightenment culture. But when revolution turned violent in 1789, her worldview hardened. The execution of Louis XVI horrified European monarchies, including Russia. Catherine responded by tightening censorship and suppressing intellectual dissent more aggressively. Fear reshaped her politics. This is another recurring historical pattern. Leaders who rise promoting openness often become defenders of restriction once they witness the destabilizing consequences of uncontrolled change. The psychology of power becomes increasingly defensive over time. Catherine's personal life also reflected the complexity of her rule. She became famous for her relationships with younger male favorites. Some were genuine, emotional companions. Others served political functions inside court life. European rivals used these relationships to undermine her reputation, often through misogynistic rumors designed to reduce her achievements to scandal. Yet, beneath the gossip was a more revealing reality. Catherine appeared deeply uncomfortable with emotional vulnerability itself. She maintained control constantly. Even intimacy existed within political structure. Loyalty mattered more than romance. Stability mattered more than affection. The isolated German teenager who once struggled for acceptance had become someone who trusted systems of control more than personal attachment. Psychologically, Catherine's life reveals a person shaped by insecurity, but strengthened through adaptation. Unlike rulers born into unquestioned authority, she developed through observation and self-construction. She created herself politically. But self-created rulers often face a unique danger, because their authority feels earned rather than inherited. Protecting it can become intensely personal. By her later years, Cathrien ruled with enormous confidence, but also with increasing distance from ordinary reality. Russian serfdom expanded under her reign, despite her earlier intellectual interest in reform. The nobility gained greater privileges. Social inequality deepened. This contradiction defined much of her legacy. She modernized aspects of Russian administration and culture, while simultaneously reinforcing systems of exploitation that trapped millions in poverty and dependence. The environment around her reinforced this contradiction constantly. Success insulated her from meaningful accountability. Military victories strengthened imperial nationalism. Admirers celebrated her intellect, while many subjects remained voiceless inside the system she governed. Power rarely changes people all at once. More often, it narrows perspective gradually. Certain compromises become normalized. Certain fears become permanent. Over time, maintaining control begins feeling identical to protecting civilization itself. Cathrien ruled Russia for 34 years. Longer than almost any female ruler in Russian history. When she died in 1796, she left behind a transformed empire. Russia had become a major European power, politically, militarily, and culturally, but she also left unresolved tensions beneath the surface. Serfdom remained entrenched. Autocracy remained absolute. The gap between elite sophistication and mass suffering remained enormous. Future Russian history would inherit those contradictions. And perhaps that is the deeper truth about Catherine the Great. She was not simply a conqueror or enlightened ruler. She was a product of political survival inside one of the harshest power structures in Europe. Her intelligence was real, her accomplishments were significant, but so were the costs of maintaining authority through fear, hierarchy, and control. The same woman who admired Enlightenment philosophy also strengthened autocracy. The same ruler who promoted culture and education also expanded systems of human dependency. That contradiction is not accidental. It reflects something enduring about power itself. People often imagine powerful figures as fundamentally different from ordinary individuals, but history suggests something more unsettling. Many rulers begin with familiar fears: fear of rejection, fear of instability, fear of losing control. Power does not erase those fears. It magnifies them. Cathrien spent her life mastering environments that once threatened her. She learned how to influence perception, how to survive emotionally, how to dominate politically. In many ways, she succeeded beyond imagination, but the longer she ruled, the more impossible it became for anyone around her to fully challenge her worldview. And that may be the quiet danger hidden inside every empire. Not simply cruelty, not simply ambition, but the gradual isolation that comes when authority grows so large that reality itself becomes filtered through loyalty, fear, and admiration. In the end, Catherine the Great did not merely rule Russia. She became inseparable from the system she created, and like many rulers before and after her, she discovered that the closer a person moves toward absolute power, the harder it becomes to see where personal destiny ends and the fate of an empire begins.